These are some examples of how you can use the fixed index, the key value pairs, and the data contract serializer. But there are a lot of other options, and you're really free to choose whatever suits your needs the best. For instance, another option could be the data contract JSON serializer, which the use is basically the same, only it serializes to JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, which tends to be a lot smaller in size. It's different than XML, but you tend to have far less overhead, and this will create more compact config strings. So that could be a good option for you. You could also choose to create your custom XML if you really want to use XML, but you don't want to use the data contract serializer because it creates a lot of type overhead. You can create your own custom XML, for instance, with link to XML, which is pretty easy. The same applies to JSON. You can have custom JSON if you want. You can even go as far as using YAML, or if you're really adventurous, you can even use the INI format, but I won't recommend that to you. And of course there are much more other options. Basically, if you can store that information in a string and you can retrieve it, then it's a possibility. And it's really a matter of choice. Which method are you most familiar with, and which method will suit your needs? Now we know how we can get all that information in the config string, but editing directly in a config string is not really user friendly for our users. So there are two major options here to make that more user friendly. In this case, we can define public properties, which are our configuration properties, and still we have to create a config string from this. So basically, if the calculation property in this case will be changed, we have to call save config changes, which in case will automatically call our get accessor of the config string, which will make sure we create that new config string, and that config string will get stored. But if you have those public properties, you can decorate them with a category or a description attribute, and AF or PySystem Explorer will automatically recognize that and will provide you with a properties explorer where you can edit those properties. So in this case, for instance, edit calculation, and that makes it a little bit more user friendly than forcing the user to use that config string directly, especially if you use some method like XAML or like XML or JSON. It's not really user friendly. So this is a nice way of making it much more user friendly and still keeping it simple. A bit more advanced is using a custom configuration form. So you can create your own Windows form, and you can use that to present the user with a user-friendly interface to configure your data reference. The way you do this is override a property called editor type, which is of the type. So what you can do here is return the type of a Windows Forms class, so a class that inherits from Windows.Forms, and you can use that class to configure that data reference and ultimately create that config string. One thing you have to keep in mind when dealing with those custom forms is that you have to have a custom constructor on that form. So in this case we have a rollup config form, and we have to have a custom constructor in this case that accepts our data reference. So our data reference in this case is called a rollup, our data reference, and a boolean to indicate that it's a read-only configuration. And once you have that information, you can populate the form with those properties from the data reference and from the config string. You can let the user edit it, and for instance, if they click OK, you can call that save config changes method on the data reference, and that will make sure that AF will pull your config string and will store it in AF. If you don't like Windows forms, you can also use WPF by using a small trick. WPF or Windows Forms has a class called element host. This allows you to store WPF user controls in Windows Forms. So if you have your configuration form, which is the type we have in editor type, with our appropriate constructor, we can create that element host and basically put it on the form, and the child of the element host will be our custom WPF control. So in this case, the same constructor type is being used, so we also pass the data reference and the boolean is read-only. And in that configuration control, we can use all that configuration. We can even use data binding, all the advanced WPF features, while still hosting it in the Windows form. So if you are accustomed to WPF, this is a really good way to go when creating those custom configuration forms. Some small tips. I would say that having or dealing with that config string is always a bit of a trade-off between being flexible in your config string by using the appropriate method, for instance using those key value pairs, or maybe using serialization. But you also have to take into account the size of the config string, especially when you're dealing with very high volumes of data references. So if you have that data reference a couple of thousand of time and you have those individual configurations, you have to make sure that your config string isn't getting too big. So for instance, if you're using XML and you think, well, maybe that config string is getting a bit too high, you can choose to go with JSON, which tends to be much more compact, or maybe go with some custom format using JSON or XML. You can use those, maybe you've seen them, for instance, in the PyPoint data reference, using variables, which you can give your own format to. Usually with the PyPoint data reference, they with the percent variable, percent sign type, but it's really up to you. If you tend to use those variable, those templates, you can use those in AF templates, and that basically means that not every data reference will have its own individual configuration, but the AF attribute, the template, will have the configuration. So that this is a big win when dealing with those volumes of config strings. And a little tip, you can look at how the other data references that ship with AF are, how they work and how they make use of the config string, and that's usually a good way of learning, and also maybe having that familiarity with the other data references. So thank you for watching this video. In the next video we will certainly talk more about using those variables and also how you can use them to point to other AF elements or other AF attributes and use them in your calculations or in your data retrieval of your AF data reference.